Developer commentaries can give a lot of fascinating insight into the process of creating a game concerning programming, art and design, and they can expose the game in full as the creative, intricate, collaborative project that games are. In the case of the original Portal and now the sequel Portal 2, the developer commentaries expose not what these games are, but what they might have been if Valve wasn't so desperate to create puzzle games for idiots. They made such a huge mistake with Portal in that they designed a simple puzzle game that relied on its concept and humour rather than the challenge of completing the actual puzzles, which, as it happens, is the entire point of puzzles. For the most part, they actually got away with it. Portal was utterly hilarious. The concept truly is brilliant. And it was so short that it was over before you had time to become frustrated by how simple it was. Portal 2, on the other hand, does exactly the same thing, but at 3 times the length of the original, and of course by being an iterative sequel, it simply can't get away with it. Except, of course, for that one little thing they added that makes it one of the best games of the year. After my introductory paragraph outlining the game as a whole, I normally talk about the story. The story is what gives context to all that follows, so it's a sensible place to start. But I can't really do that with Portal 2 because it doesn't really have a single story. In fact, it's not really a single game. It feels like, you know, when you get a film based on a television program that, while they claim it's a film and while its runtime is feature length, it's not a film. It's actually just 3 television episodes mushed together. That's exactly what Portal 2 feels like. The game is split very clearly into 3 2-hour-long episodes. The first episode, which comprises 5 of the game's 9 chapters, opens with a hilarious scripted sequence where we're introduced to Wheatly, a personality corp voiced by Stephen Merchant who follows you around the Aperture facility. Wheatley is a very human character on the opposite end of the spectrum from GLaDOS, being very animated and concerned for the player, and monstrously stupid. The character prattles on inanely in so Stephen Merchant-like a way that it's easy to imagine he was given only the most basic guidance about what to say and made the rest up himself. And if you like Stephen Merchant, you're going to find him very funny. There's also a backup AI controlling the facility during GLaDOS' absence, and although he's only in the game briefly, his overly enthusiastic enunciation contrasts hilariously with the content of his messages. And this is just as well because GLaDOS has been completely neutered. She's no longer sharp, witty, cruel, or in any way funny for the most part, though she does have a couple of good lines. As far as the legacy of this character goes, Valve has pretty much ruined it, but there's no rule stating that GLaDOS has to be a good character for Portal 2 to be good. Wheatley takes the baton from GLaDOS in his stride and carries the game for the first and last 2 hours, while the new character covers the in-between. The basic premise of Portal 2, if you somehow don't know, is that it's a puzzle game where you bend space to your will with a gun that allows you to shoot 2 portals into special white portal surfaces. By entering one, you exit through the other. You play as a test subject stuck in a facility controlled by a mad AI who wants nothing more than to make you test out puzzles, when she's not trying to kill you. It's a brilliant premise, but the thing with Portal gameplay in both 1 and 2 is that you can only fire portals onto certain surfaces, and while not exactly trial and error, there is a pretty clear step-by-step process to solving the puzzles because there are so few portal surfaces in each room. It's like you can put a portal here, or you can put a portal there, because those are the only 2 portal surfaces the room has, and then right away the puzzle of this large, 3-dimensional game space has been reduced to 2 small squares of the room. This is a fundamental flaw with the design, and then in certain situations this also leads to the spot the white wall problem, where the 2 small squares of the room you need to use are pretty well hidden. In other words, we're pixel hunting in 2011. Yeah. And another problem with Portal 1 is the fact that the entire game is a tutorial. Now that's not such a big deal because the whole game only lasts 90 minutes, but having played through the 90-minute long tutorial that is the original game, the last thing I then need is for the first hour of Portal 2 that would be 1/6 of the game, to be another tutorial, yet that is exactly what it is. This, along with just how disjointed the 3 episodes of Portal 2 are, as mentioned earlier, leads me to the conclusion that Portal 2 should have just been a fully episodic game. Portal 2 would have been episodes 2, 3 and 4, with the original Portal retroactively becoming episode 1. This would have given Valve the freedom to do exactly what they should have done, have Portal 2's difficulty curve begin where Portal's ends. And I mean, as much as I love the concept of Portal, playing through an easy puzzle game is like playing through a first-person shooter on the easiest difficulty level. There's just no fucking point to it. They even go as far as to essentially have you replay test chambers from the original Portal, which is just offensive. But Valve did at least have the good sense to make Portal 2's first episode visually distinct from Portal 1 by having the facility falling apart and overrun by plants in GLaDOS' absence. There are 3 new puzzle elements added to the game in the first episode: springboards, lasers and hard light platforms, but of the 3 only the latter is truly new and is also by far the coolest thing about the first 2 hours of the game. The springboard, which flings you through the air at high speeds, is sometimes used in puzzles about bouncing around and maybe catching stuff in mid-air, but mostly they're just a way to simply generate momentum by placing a portal platform above a springboard. This makes them pretty much no different to just falling off of a high platform into a portal, meaning you're already well aware of how the idea works. In other words, it's just a variation on an existing puzzle element, and it's pretty frustrating to go into a chamber and just know right away how to solve it, because you've done almost exactly the same thing in the original Portal. Lasers are also nothing special. They're more or less a replacement for the energy balls of the original game, with the distinction being that lasers aren't annoying as fuck. It's a continuous beam, so you don't have to stand around waiting for it to travel to its intended destination, and rather than killing you instantly as the energy balls in the original game did, it takes a few seconds touching the beam before you die. Sometimes you have to block a laser from reaching its receptacle using an object, sometimes you have to redirect it with a special cube into a receptacle, but whatever it is, the puzzle design is usually of the utmost triviality. Hard light platforms, on the other hand, are pretty fantastic. Hard light is exactly what it sounds like, and depending on the orientation of the original beam, you can use it as a platform to stand on, or as a shield to guide you from turrets that will otherwise kill you. What makes it so cool is that, because it's a platform, you're able to alter, albeit temporarily, the architecture of a room by creating new light platforms. These puzzles are still hurt by how few portal surfaces there are in each chamber, but there are nevertheless some really good puzzles based around the idea, and most importantly, they are totally new, while springboards and lasers are mostly variations of existing puzzle elements from Portal 1. Portal 2 makes more of an effort to break up the repetitiveness of test chamber after test chamber, with a few non-puzzle sequences in this first episode. I won't go into detail about what they are exactly, but I will say that they are pretty rubbish. In some, you've got Wheatley guiding you through the facility, which consists of one linear gantry. In others, you're told to run for your life and there's music pumping in the background and it's all super dramatic, but ultimately you're still just following one linear gantry, and if you choose to stand there, nothing even happens really. Valve has historically shown a mastery of organic level design, not in hiding the linearity, but in simply making it feel natural. And that's something Portal 2 doesn't have at all in these sequences. It just feels completely silly being guided to the one and only place you're physically capable of going. If Portal 2 really had been an episodic game, I'd be scoring this episode an OK. A story twist that might have been unpredictable had Stephen Merchant not been English plunges you into a world of anachronistic super science and Portal 2's second episode, introducing a totally new environment style, some amazing new gameplay elements, and a fantastic new character. The middle chunk of Portal 2 feels completely disconnected from the first episode, and this is where my criticisms turn to praise, because this episode is just so good. It's so good that it should have been its own standalone game, and in a sense, it actually is. The character introduced in this episode is Cave Johnson, the founder of Aperture. If you've seen any of the promotional trailers for the game, that's him. he's pretty much a human male version of GLaDOS, disinterested in the well-being of testers, provided science gets done. Almost every single thing he has to say is hilarious, and he's voiced spectacularly well by J.K. Simmons.
Those of you who volunteered to be injected with praying mantis DNA, I've got some good news and some bad news. Bad news is we're postponing those tests indefinitely. Good news is we've got a much better test for you. Fighting an army of mantis men. Pick up a rifle and follow the yellow line. You'll know when the test starts.
In this episode, which spans chapters 6 and 7 and is also about 2 hours long, we're down in the bowels of the facility, which is also the original Aperture facility created in the late 1940s. As you go through the retro test chambers, you're listening to recorded audio messages by Cave talking to you about what Aperture is, what it does, and what you can expect to be doing. And these recordings gave me exactly what I wanted. Besides laughing at almost every single thing he has to say, there's also some great insight into both the character's life and the early years of Aperture. Valve tells a pretty comprehensive origin story here, and as you travel back up into the modern facility, you move up through a timeline of story elements and aesthetic changes as new structures are built on top of the old ones, and it's just great stuff. As you'd expect, you play through test chamber after test chamber, but unlike episode 1, Valve successfully managed to break up the monotony here with regular interludes between test chambers where you're exploring the facility. There's still the linearity, of course, but this time it's made to feel natural, and there's good use of the portal gun, and these sections feel like the final 20 minutes of the original Portal. It's not anything super spectacular, but as with everything else in episode 2, it's done right, which can't be said of episode 1 or, for the most part, of episode 3. There's only one new gameplay element added here, albeit with multiple applications, but it's a good one. Just as Portal itself was based on a student game, the new gameplay mechanic added to Portal 2 is also based on a student game. That game is Tag the Power of Paint, and its mechanic transfers into Portal gameplay so naturally that it's easy to imagine it was originally designed with Portal gameplay in mind. The new gameplay mechanic is paint. It leaks, drips, or spews from pipes or faucets and covers everything it touches. There are 3 types of paint, each with its own property. Blue paint functions as a springboard that you can bounce off of. Orange paint functions as a running speed booster, while white paint can be used to turn non-portal surfaces into portal surfaces. The puzzles with these paints is figuring out where to put them and how to get the desired result. For instance, you might want to squirt orange paint onto a runway and then blue paint onto a ramp at the end, which will let you take a very fast run up and then bounce a great distance. Again, the small number of portal surfaces in each test chamber limits your options and reveals the solution to you with little brain effort. But the way these new puzzles work makes them such a pleasure to play through. It's almost like playing Portal again for the first time, and I loved every minute of this middle episode. If Portal 2 really had been an episodic game, this episode would be scored an excellent. You eventually make your way back up to the modern facility and find yourself in the final 2-hour episode of the game, which spans chapters 8 and 9. I'm going to skip the story elements here since it's the end of the game and just go straight to the gameplay. This episode carries over gameplay elements from episodes 1 and 2, but it also introduces one new one: gravity beams. Anything that gets caught up in a gravity beam will move either towards or away from the gravity beam source, depending on the colour of the gravity beam. It is overall a pretty good gameplay element. It works especially well with the paint for some good puzzles, and there are some cool moments where you're floating over a death pit and have to quickly pop off a load of portals to change the position of the gravity beam, falling out of one and into another. But the thing that resonates most strongly about the gravity beam is how much better an idea it could have been than linear beams. Looking at games like Super Mario Galaxy, where the gravity of a whole room can be altered, or The Ball, where the ball becomes a dynamic, localized gravity source, the gravity beam stuff from Valve just feels like phoning it in. They could do much better than this, and after the fantastic paint puzzles of the middle episode, the final 2 hours of Portal 2 is anticlimactic. No game should blow its load 2/3 of the way through, but Portal 2 does exactly that. The final 2 hours of the game is definitely better than the first 2 hours of the game, but it's also definitely worse than the middle 2 hours of the game. And again, if Portal 2 really was an episodic game, this episode would be scored a good. Generally, there's some good polish added to the game as a whole. I replayed Portal 1 while playing through Portal 2, and the most striking thing is just how much faster you move in the sequel. It's easy to forget, but you move ridiculously slowly in Portal 1, and Portal 2 thankfully fixes that. They also refined and formally defined clearly which surfaces are portal surfaces and why they are portal surfaces, with a great callback at the end of the game. It makes it much easier to tell where your portals can go, and you won't find yourself trying to spam portals onto any surface that isn't dark. They also added a HUD element that lets you see your placed portals through walls, which is a really handy tool, as there's nothing more annoying than forgetting which portal you want as your exit and which is your entrance. Though I already had a system in place to circumvent that issue myself. If the solo campaign was the whole game, Portal 2 would be a game that could overall be described as good, but that could better be described as devastatingly unrealised potential. But then there's also the small matter of the cooperative campaign. Adding a second player to the Portal formula improves the gameplay by an order of magnitude, and it just affects so many things that it's hard to know where to start. I suppose the main thing is that it adds a delightfully sinister element of schadenfreude to the game, which is only helped by GLaDOS's taunts being alternately aimed at one player and then the other. You just can't help but giggle with devilish glee as she announces that you're doing much better than your opponents and, ally, and it's done in so creative a way that you'll actually start to wonder whether or not it really is scripted. You also just can't help but laugh when someone messes up and dies, even if you're the one messing up and dying. In solo, when you die, it's, I guess I did it wrong, I'll try putting a portal over there instead. In co-op, it's, what the fuck is that? Even if it's you dying. And if you're co-oping the way you're meant to be co-oping, your extremely embarrassing hysterical laughter is blurting out of your friend's speakers, and theirs out of yours. Credit where credit is due, Valve has created some great levels that fully facilitate two-player teamwork, but Co-op Portal is simply an idea that couldn't fail to be brilliant. So brilliant, in fact, that unless Valve has some major design changes planned for Portal 3, I don't even want a solo campaign in the next game. As I said earlier, there's a very serious problem with Portal gameplay, in as much as it's a very limited step-by-step process solving the puzzles, because the number of portal surfaces in each chamber is so few. Portal 2's co-op almost completely resolves this, perhaps unintentionally looking at how little the core design of the solo campaign has advanced since the original, because although it is still a step-by-step process, 2 players means 2 separate sets of steps, and with many but not all the puzzles in the co-op campaign, the steps have to be completed concurrently, one by one player and the other by the other, which makes coordination and teamwork a requirement, and that's the source of the fun. And it really is fun. In fact, Co-op Portal 2 feels less about the actual puzzles and more about simply working together as a team to accomplish something that 2 individuals can't. It almost doesn't even matter if the puzzle is challenging. The co-op-y stuff can be something as simple as passing a cube from one person to another, standing on a higher platform, or synchronised lever pulling, but it mostly goes much deeper than that. You're regularly each standing in a different part of the level with a very different perspective of the puzzle, or even separately entirely, and only through pure teamwork can you solve the puzzles. Not all the puzzles are like this. There are some where one player can solve the whole thing while the other is just running into walls and dancing, while other puzzles may have one player solving a big chunk and then another player finishing it off. But most of the time it's a true team effort. Valve has included a couple of funky things to make the teamwork pretty easy. By far the most useful is the ability to drop pings showing your friends where to look, where to place portals, and other handy stuff like that. But you're also able to bring up a picture-in-picture display of your friend's screen to see what he or she is looking at, which is just super useful. But it's not without its flaws. While the solo campaign has some replay value thanks to the story, there's no real reason to replay the co-op campaign once you've finished it. I'm told Valve is planning a free update that will include co-op challenges and leaderboards for competitive play, which will certainly give us something to do once the co-op campaign is over, but I'm not especially into that sort of thing. Worse still, if you're playing the co-op for the first time, you absolutely have to play with someone else who's also playing it for the first time. That's really going to limit a lot of people, and I have friends who haven't yet played it because all of their friends have played it. Finally, there's also a full developer commentary for both the single player campaign and some of the co-op maps, which have been rejiggered to work with the single player. I love audio commentaries, and until they're standard in all games, I'm going to go out of my way to praise them in every single game that has them. But I find the commentaries here fairly depressing, as they describe in detail the work Valve put in to make Portal 2 as idiot-proof a game as possible. But it is insightful and entertaining, and it gives you a worthwhile reason to replay the solo campaign pretty much right away after finishing the game. So 6 hours becomes 12, and coupled with the 6 hours of the co-op campaign, this is one fucking long game. Portal 2's solo campaign is as much a mixed bag of quality as you're ever likely to see in a single game. It makes some pretty bad mistakes, including a lesson apparently not learned from Portal 1, but it also introduces some magnificent new gameplay elements. It also, at least for one episode, tells a compelling and interesting story, introducing a fantastic new character who is easily GLaDOS' equal. The co-op campaign, on the other hand, is simply magnificent. Co-op shares some design problems with solo, but overcomes them simply by virtue of the second player, becoming one of the best cooperative experiences I have ever had. I unreservedly recommend you buy this game, but if you're buying it exclusively for solo, prepare for ups and downs, but an overall good experience. If you're buying it for the overall package, I simply cannot recommend this game enough.